Good morning. I'm really grateful you're here. Really, and really glad that I get to do this. So, yeah, thank you. No. Um, so we're not meeting next Sunday, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way whatsoever. But I said a number of times that Easter Sunday at St. Paul's is probably the finest religious theater you could expose yourself to. This past week, we went to Emily Amos, our organ scholars master's recital at Rice. It was stunning. As a matter of fact, when she was playing her first piece, I found myself weeping. It just was so magnificent. And I've already been told that today she outdoes herself. So if you have not been to the Palm Sunday service, go for the organ, if nothing else, because she's wonderful to do that. So anyway, I'm glad you're here. And no matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So we begin in silence. Our silence is a way that we have of affirming that and remembering that we live inside the sacred heart of sacred mystery, and that this mystery seeks to find expression through who we are and how we live in this world, how we relate to each other. So if it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. Don't close your mind. Oh, interesting slip. A Freudian slip is when you mean to say one thing and say say another. So, may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be in our end and at our departing. And may we be shown how to draw closer to grace every step along the wayless way, and may we be given the courage to walk it. And may all of creation benefit because of what we do here today. There you go. Give us this day our daily bread. So, those words come from a version of the Lord's Prayer that most people are familiar with. And there are very few words in the Christian collection that we call the New Testament that are more fraught with history and other meanings than this phrase. I don't get to use the word fraught very often. It's a word that comes from the 13th century, and it means loaded, as if it's a word that they used when they talked about a ship in the early sailing days that was loaded with cargo. I was not able to count all these little boxes that you see on this container ship. Those sit on the 18-wheel trucks that you see. That's a lot of freight. And as a matter of fact, the word freight comes from the word fraught. So there's your English lesson for today. So give us this day our daily bread. It is just fraught with meaning. So I want to, before I'm done here today, show you some of the ways that this phrase is loaded with meaning, much of it having to do with Jewish history. And consequently, this is the phrase that is perhaps most misunderstood in the Lord's Prayer. It is not a simple request for food. It is a profound social justice proclamation. And it was for his insistence of the truth of this saying that Jesus was executed. Now, there is not a person in this room who has not uttered those words at some time or another. So how did we miss all this deep meaning? Well, one reason has to do with the fact that it's easy to focus on the religion that we're using to draw meaning from. And in basing our teachings on the narrative of the life of Jesus, which I'm now doing now, I'm drawing on the Christian story. But the wisdom story is so much greater than this. There is a story that exceeds both in grandeur and excellence the insights of any religion. So it is the story of the prodigiously creative energy that is the source of all that is and all that is within us coming into being. That's the great story. And the energy that we casually refer to as God was at work billions of years before any religion came on the scene. And that same creative wisdom is continuing to give birth to radically new possibilities that challenge and defy what we hold so tightly to be the truth. And even when one narrows down the great story into a specific religion in an effort to understand, it is so easy to misread that religion that one chooses to be a part of. Every religion on the planet is a human construct, not a divine revelation. And most people who identify as Christian, and I don't mean this to be a criticism of anyone, don't really know how the Christian religion came to be. They identify with what they believe is Christianity with a part of the tribe that they are in that calls themselves Christian. Now that is what allowed Brooks Pottinger, who is an evangelical pastor at Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship, to say publicly this past week that he prayed to God that God would kill James Tallarico. He is the pastor of a church, a Christian church. And it is standing in another tribal understanding of the Christian religion that allowed Tallarico to respond, "You may pray for my death, but I still love you. I will love you more than you could ever hate me." I wonder which one do you think is more in the Jesus tradition? I had an interesting conversation, very intense conversation this week with someone who responded to my teaching last week of Jesus did not die for your sins. And it was not a negative conversation at all. It was really very great, rich theological conversation. And we got to talking about tradition. And tradition looks back, and it can be very informative. But my conviction is that if we are going to claim a tradition, we need to be as intellectually well informed about that tradition as we would hope a heart surgeon would be well informed about her craft before she operates on us. So I repeat something I've said before. The purpose of religion is to provide us a firm foundation that will enable us to step off of it into the uncharted territory that is the spiritual life. Now, if the religious foundation is shoddy, so will be the spiritual life. So the purpose of authentic, wise, useful religion is to take us beyond where we are, not rigidly holding on to a past, but enthusiastically embracing a future that we do not control. And we don't like that because we love to be in control, but it is exciting. If we misconstrue the past, we will have difficulty in viewing the future in a more constructive and hopeful way. But we live in a culture of control. And this lust for control is driving us in a direction that lacks trust, imagination, and creativity. One of my theological heroes is Daramu Muraku, and he has written, God did not begin the spiritual renewal of creation with the introduction of major religions. Neither should we. Truth is always before us rather than based on some idealized memories of the past, of certainties that are behind us. And one of our most urgent needs today, maybe the most urgent need, is a new sense of what the cosmic field of energy in which we live is all about. This is today's class in one sentence. So if you want to take a nap, somebody will nudge you when the offering plate comes by. But it is this that can free us more than anything else from the forces that are not only blinding us today, but which are leading us into a sea of destructive chaos. So 6 years ago, about this very time, we were in our second week of isolation because of COVID. We thought it would pass in a matter of weeks. That was 2020. It was not declared over until 2023. So David Attenborough, who is another one of my heroes and role models, because he's working well into his mid-90s, he produced and narrated a documentary titled The Year the Earth Changed. Now this is available on Apple TV and it's available on Amazon Prime. It's less than an hour or just about an hour, and I strongly encourage you to watch it. I intend to watch it again. But it tells the story of how the earth healed itself when we humans stopped our daily activity. It's a really great film. And as badly handled as the shutdown was in this country, as much political divisiveness as it revealed, as awful as it was that so many people died, many of them unnecessarily, the film has a silver lining to it. Because during the pandemic, wildlife rebounded. Penguins in Cape Town, normally forced to avoid humans, were able to freely come and go during the day, which led their young being fed more often and thus surviving. Sea turtle population increased by as much as 60%. Humpback whales, freed from the constant noise of ships, were able to communicate over much greater distances, which allowed the mothers to roam for food and raise healthier calves. And because global shipping dropped, dolphins were able to triple their range of communication. There was a return of silence. When we lived in West U, where we lived at that time, I remember one morning during the shutdown, stepping out to get the paper when it had resumed being delivered. And I stood there for a moment trying to figure out what's different. And then I realized that usually, though it's a half a mile from where we lived, I didn't any longer hear the roar of the traffic on the Southwest Freeway of people going into work. That noise had stopped. Attenborough's film says that birds in cities like San Francisco were heard singing in ways not recorded since the 1950s. Air, water cleared dramatically. Smog in parts of India cleared up so dramatically that the Himalayas became visible from cities in India for the first time in generations. Animals regained lost territory. In Kenya, there was not a single rhinoceros that was poached for its horn. First time in 20 years. The message of the film is really very optimistic because the earth doesn't require another shutdown. We humans, by making small adjustments, could keep those gains going. Of course, we haven't done that. There were two other remarkable things that happened during the shutdown. You may have been part of them. One was the dramatic increase in alcohol consumption, especially among women. I see you recognize yourself in this. Heavy drinking rose 20% during COVID. Among women, that increase is 41%. I have now talked to two psychologists who specialize in dealing with children, who say that they are seeing in their practices the effects on children who were raised by what these psychologists call day drinkers. Now, there are many reasons for this. There's the removal of the natural social brakes on drinking. There was the felt need for self-medication. But I have another interpretation. When I was a child and I would be taken to other cities by my parents, I would see neon signs that advertised spirits sold here. And I always wondered why alcohol was referred to as spirits. And then years later, I encountered the work of Carl Jung. Carl Jung, who didn't know it at the time, played a significant role in the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Bob Smith, one of the co-founders of AA with Bill Wilson, made the arduous journey to go see Carl Jung because he had heard that this now famous psychiatrist had had success in treating people from alcoholism. And he recounted to Carl Jung his many failed attempts at recovering. And after he had told his story, Jung said to him, "I can't help you. Your situation is hopeless." To which Dr. Bob, who was stunned, said, "Well, what am I to do?" And Carl Jung said to him, "You might try religion." So he came back, met Bill Wilson, and if you're familiar at all with the 12 steps, you know that they begin with, we realized our situation was hopeless, and we decided to turn our lives over to a higher power. So later in correspondence between Bill Wilson and Carl Jung said in essence that he had always considered alcoholism a search for the spirit that was misdirected. Hence we call it spirits. The even more remarkable thing that happened during the COVID shutdown has to do with bread. The bread making surge was even more dramatic than the drinking. Yeast sales shot up 457%, baking powder 178%, and flour climbed by 155%. Thank you, Claude. You don't know who Claude is? Oh, Claude is the AI servant you should be using. It comes from Anthropic, the one that would not let the Pentagon use them, for they wanted to enforce moral use of their platform. Now, I think the same reason that bread making increased was the same as alcohol. It was stress relief. It was a way to deal with the loss of control. We had more time at home. Some people described it as a form of mindfulness. I remember that my daughter and other people during COVID actually sent me photographs of their sourdough starter and sourdough bread that they were making during COVID. I didn't go down that particular route. I practiced card tricks. So, now, bread is not universally sacramental in religion. It is in Judaism and Christianity. But in every religion, bread is a symbol and used as a symbol of provision, hospitality, and the sacred nature of sustaining life. Now, those of us, like myself, who grew up being taught either explicitly or implicitly that the Bible, especially the parts about Jesus, are historical events and meant to be taken literally, we have a hard time remembering that the accounts of Jesus' life are parables to be taken metaphorically. Okay? They are to be taken seriously, but they are not in any way to be taken literally. Now, everybody in this crowd has said, heard, "Give us this day our daily bread." But we don't hear it fraught with meaning, nor do I think we really know what it means. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is we're not Jewish. The Gospel of Matthew, which is where you find the version of the Lord's Prayer most of us are familiar with, was written from a Jewish perspective for a Jewish audience, not for us. None of the Bible was written for us. Another reason it's difficult for us to hear is that we are not in that historical context. Now, if you read one of the narratives of Jesus' life, his deeds as well as his teachings, you will read that he did most of his teaching near or on water. He wasn't born near water. Jerusalem isn't near water. So why did he spend all his time on the water? I mentioned to you before that one of the first symbols of the church was a boat, the ship of the church. And even earlier was the symbol of the fish. Now, in seminary, we were taught that the fish was used as an early code to identify where Christians met. And there are even etchings on the catacombs of the little fish symbol like you see on this bumper sticker. And we were taught in seminary that the word fish in Greek, ichthus, if you take those initials, they can be an acronym for Jesus Christ, God's only Son. That is not how the first people who used that symbol took that or meant it. And you've probably also seen that one as well. Those interpretations came to the table very late in the game, in the theological game. So why did Jesus teach by water? Why did he call disciples from the fishing industry? Why in the resurrection appearances of Jesus is Jesus seen on shore cooking a fish when his disciples come in from a day of fishing? Why is all this fishy stuff in the New Testament? So here's the teaching of give us this day our daily bread in one sentence. I will give it to you, and then we're going to unpack this for the rest of the time today. The daily bread spoken of is the daily bread of justice, along with the daily danger of challenging daily injustice. That's what the phrase is about. So why is there all this fishy stuff? And there is a lot. At the time Jesus began his ministry, he called or selected some very special followers called apostles. They're different than disciples. A disciple is a student of a teacher. An apostle is someone who is charged with replicating the teacher's work. So Jesus called these people from their jobs as fishermen, and they left. Likely, if the industry had been thriving, they would not have left. But they left their professions, and they left their families. And as they did so, he would teach them to replicate his work. And he ended up saying to those people, I'm going to teach you to be fishers of men or people. Now, I grew up believing that what that phrase meant was that we were to go out and save people so that when they died, they wouldn't go to hell. Actually, that is not what that really meant. We were to go out and get people to join our church. That's what it meant, which is not the same as following Jesus. So there is a story that is told 6 times in the Jesus narratives. Now, when something is repeated that often, it's got to be significant. You know what that story is? You do. Some of you know what that story is. It's the story of Jesus feeding a multitude with 5 loaves and 2 fish, sacred number 7. John Dominic Crossan, in his book on the Lord's Prayer, says that at the time Jesus began his ministry, Herod Antipas, the guy who cut John the Baptist's head off, had imposed severe taxes on the fishing industry. There were taxes for having a boat. There were taxes for fishing. There were taxes for selling fish. So it was an enormous burden. The situation was not right. It was not fair. Or even more importantly, it was not according to the will of God, according to Jewish law. So Jesus began his ministry where he did, so that the violence of Rome's empire and the nonviolence of God's empire would have a confrontation. Jesus' program was actually about who owns the earth, the land, and the lake. Is it Rome or God? And therefore, who owns the food produced by the earth, the land, and the lake? By taxation, Antipas had already taken over the bread market. And now he was doing the same to the fishing industry. So there is this parable that is told 6 times in the Gospels. I'm going to read you the earliest one. It's in Mark. So they got in a boat and went off to a remote place by themselves. Someone saw them going and word got about. From the surrounding town, people went out on foot, running, got there ahead of them. When Jesus arrived, he saw this huge crowd. At the sight of them, his heart broke. Like sheep with no shepherd they were. So he went right to work teaching them. After he had taught them all day, a problem arose. The crowd was hungry. Where would food come from? The disciples went to Jesus and said, we need to send these folks away so they can go buy something to eat. But Jesus said, no, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, are you out of your mind? This is my translation. It would cost a fortune to feed these folks. Jesus responded, you feed them. His message to them was, you have a responsibility to distribute God's food to God's people. Now there's some variation in these 6 stories, but they are remarkably similar. How much food do you have? Well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, tell the people to sit down, and then what follows must have been this is a parable, not literal, a time-consuming organizational problem of dividing the crowd into groups of hundreds and fifties. And then in Mark we read, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. I want you to notice the highlighted words in that slide, because they appear over and over and over in the story about Jesus. In the Gospels, in Paul, in early liturgies, and even today in our liturgies. It's the common meal we call communion or the Eucharist. There is just so much rich history behind the phrase, our daily bread. Jesus brings the disciples over to his vision that they, and if we're following, we are responsible for the adequate distribution of food. That there be fair distribution. So the distribution of people into groups recalls the time when, in very similar circumstances, Moses divided people into manageable groups during the Exodus journey. So the parables of the feeding of the multitudes say, and we know this in this world now, there is more than enough food already, and yet it has to pass through the hands of divine justice. And when it is taken, blessed, broken, and given out, there's enough for everybody. Now, if you remember, when we started this study into the Lord's Prayer, I said the phrase, our Father who art in heaven, is about someone who is a householder of a well-run house. A well-run house is well-provisioned, and everybody in the house is adequately served. And Jesus says, this task belongs to you, to me, to his disciples. So to say the prayer, give us this day our daily bread, is not just about food. It is about just food. So it became the central ritual of the early Jesus followers about sharing a meal together. Now, I grew up, as I have mentioned to you, in a tradition, Baptist church, where we had the Lord's Supper once a quarter. Methodists have it once a month. I mean, actually, in this church, we do it once a week if you come to midweek Eucharist service. Many Roman Catholic churches have it every day. But in the Baptist church, it was just something we did. I don't think it was ever explained to me what it meant. I think it would be interesting to take a poll on the first Sunday in April, no, that's Easter, that's next Sunday, the first Sunday in May, to take a poll after we have communion here, service at the table, we call it, and interview people when they leave St. Paul's and ask them, can you tell me the meaning of the communion service that you just participated in? I think it would be very revealing. Now, in most Protestant churches, it's referred to as communion, and I would wager that that's what most people would tell you it means. It means we commune with each other, and it means we commune with God. In the Catholic tradition, the word used for it is the Eucharist, and the word Eucharist means thanksgiving. And my hunch is also that most people partaking in the elements say that it's a way of giving thanks to God. And when I have participated in communion services here and elsewhere, I have heard that phrase a lot, particularly when I give the bread. People will dip it in the cup and say, thank you, Jesus. So I want to tell you what I think the common meal meant for Jesus and for his early followers. The Eucharistic meal is a reminder that Jesus not only lived for the just distribution of food, but he died for the same reason. Jesus was teaching that the world and its food belong to God, not to Rome. And that the just distribution of food is what the world would look like if God ran the show. And it was for that he was executed. And it wasn't long after he was executed that the early Jesus followers exchanged the phrase bread and wine for blood and body. So Christians participating in the Lord's Supper are collaborating with the justice of God as revealed in the death and life of Jesus. Again, I want to point out, Jesus doesn't say anything anywhere about his substituting for us. He invites us to participate with him. It's always about God's food and God's world for God's people, and all of that is packed in that one simple phrase, give us this day our daily bread. And what comes next after this phrase, as it must, is forgive us our debts. Now, we won't deal with that next Sunday because we'll be going to church at 8 and 9:30 and 11. I expect to see you at all three. As I said, this little phrase, give us this day our daily bread, is just so full of meaning and history. And the early Jesus followers, the ones who put together the narratives about his life, they were Jewish. And so they were influenced by their Jewish liturgical year. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but there's a trend in biblical scholarship today to say that the Gospels are actually divided into sections that fit the Jewish liturgical year. Did you know that? Mark covers 6 months of the Jewish year, and Matthew and Luke cover all 12. But there is likely no phrase in the Lord's Prayer that is more influenced by Jewish history and liturgy than this phrase, give us this day our daily bread. Not only is it a prayer for justice, it's a prayer for being present. Give us this day. Not tomorrow, not next week, but for today. Give us what we need for right now. So, before we meet again, our Jewish brothers and sisters are going to celebrate the high holy day of Passover. And the heart of a Passover celebration is a ritual that the Jews call the Seder meal. The word Seder means order, as in an order of service. Things are done in an orderly fashion. It isn't a worship service. It's an occasion of both solemnity and frivolity. It's got to be, because there are 5 glasses of wine drunk, 4. 5th one set aside for Elijah. So we non-drinkers have to resort to grape juice. So did you know that the grape juice used in the Methodist Church was actually invented by a guy named Welch? I'm just serious. It's the truth. I always tell the truth in here. Every story I tell in here is the truth. Okay, some of them have not happened yet, but Welch invented Welch's grape juice for the Methodist so that they could have juice at communion. That's a true story. That is the origin of Welch's grape juice. So at any rate, at the Seder meal, there is an enactment of the Exodus story. Now, once again, and this is going to come as a shock to some of you, the Exodus story is a parable. It is not history. Now, if you doubt me, when you go home today, go to Wikipedia and look up the Exodus, and it will tell you no reputable scholar says this is history. It's a story. It's a great story. But I want you to use your imagination. And I want you to go with me to a time that never existed, but always is. And as the great storytellers would say, I don't know if this really happened or not, but I know it's true. So we had this leader. His name was Moses, and he was a person of great courage, great insight, great charisma. He was also flawed. After all, he had committed murder. But he was our leader. And we were led, some say by him, some say it was by the hand of God, out of horrible bondage through a series of exciting and awesome events. Now, any person who has escaped any kind of addiction, either substance or process addiction, will tell you that it's a miracle that they escaped that. People in recovery know the Exodus story personally. The church should be a better model of recovery. At any rate, we made it out of bondage. And then we had the pilgrimage. I don't know if pilgrimage is a verb or not, but I know that it is something that we do. Being on the wayless way is to pilgrimage. And at first, it was so exciting. My God, we were free. We're in new territory. And then life can be, as it becomes, just one day after another. And let's face it, sometimes it's just one damn day after another. Now, that's not to say there were no special moments. There are. There was this time when food was hard to get. And we wake up one morning and we found that the ground is covered with this substance that we're told is manna. By the way, the word manna is the same word that is used in the Lord's Prayer for bread. Oh, God, we were so grateful. All we had to do was pick it up. But we only got one day's supply. Give us this day our daily bread. That's where this comes from. Now, on the day before the Sabbath, we got 2 days. It didn't have to work on the Sabbath. And we only got enough for our family unit. Everybody got a fair amount. Oh, man, how we rejoiced. God was so good to us. Oh. Day after day, the manna appeared. Day after day. Day after day. For 40 years. And we got sick of it. We got tired of it. We said, is this what freedom is like? I don't want it. I'd rather go back to where we had the tasty herbs, the onions, the garlic of our days in Egypt. We may have been slaves, but at least our taste buds got some exercise. The sameness of the journey just wore us down. And looking at the nourishment given to us, we said, why have we done this? Why have we gotten ourselves into this fix? And in the narrative of the Exodus, it says, we despise this worthless food. Now you get this transition. That which had been an answer to our prayers, that which we had once eaten with startled and grateful hearts, that which we were sure was a sign that God did indeed care about us, was present with us each step along the way, that which had given us so much meaning, had now grown stale and flat and useless. And we called it, though it was the same thing, this worthless food. Jesus comes along, and his Jewish followers, long after his death, put into his mouth his saying, I am the bread come down like manna from heaven. It's the same word. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus told about a parable with we are told a parable about Jesus' encounter with the divider. That's what the word devil means. One who divides. That's what's happening in our culture, right? It's diabolical, divisive. But in that parable, Jesus was tempted to turn stones into manna. At meal with his friends, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it, so that brokenness can be a symbol of something we take into ourselves and are nourished by our own brokenness. Every step along the way, our nourishment has had to do with manna. Now, my agenda in teaching ordinary life is no secret. I'm trying to learn for myself and then share with you what it means to follow the wayless way. And part of my evangelical tradition, which I cannot shake, is that I want to entice you to do the same. Now, you may not do that, and that's fine. That's your decision. But if you refuse to get on the wayless way, please don't do it because you get up and caught up in some nonsense, like the literal nature of the Bible or the virgin birth or the belief that Jesus died for your sins. Do it for a better reason than that. The real issue of the wayless way is that we are called to authentic living, a way of love, of truth-telling, of trust, of freedom. And this is really important, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The prayer is, give us this day our daily bread, not give me. Now, sometimes on the Wayless Way, whether it's from me or from some other teacher, it's possible for you to walk out of here saying, well, I've heard that before. It's worthless food. My experience is that struggling with the same old manna every day, I am taken to deeper and more meaningful territory. I have no idea. I tried to find out how many times I have preached a sermon, given a homily, or taught a class on this very phrase. Every time I do it, I learn something new. How much more real could we possibly make love and justice than by feeding each other and by feeding other people, both literally and metaphorically? So I'm going to go back to this class in a sentence. Our most urgent need today is a new sense of what the cosmic field of energy in which we live is all about. That, more than anything, can free us the forces that are not only blinding us, but which are leading us into a sea of destructive chaos. So I'm sorry to say there is no startlingly new thing, no new technique, no gimmick for us to work out the meaning of life. Meaning comes from manna, what we at times find very, very nourishing, and at times look at and call this worthless food. It hasn't changed. Our perception of it may. So decades ago, shortly after I first came to Houston, I was working with a spiritual teacher, and I complained to him that we just seemed to be covering the same old ground. Nothing new. And he was a Buddhist. And he said, you know, every year the tree brings forth the same leaves. But they are always new. Isn't that a paradox? So give us this day our daily bread. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step. I will see you in church at 8, 9:30, or 11 next Sunday, and back here in 2 weeks. Thank you.